So did everyone have a chance to review those minutes? I believe Jeff, you had drafted them.
Correct. Yep.
Any questions, comments, or changes before we make a motion? All right, seeing none, I'll move that we approve the meeting minutes from March 20th, 2023 as presented. So second.
Second.
Any discussion? Roll call vote. Hark,
Aye.
Holland,
Aye.
Palmer,
Aye.
and Malinowski's aye. So that's unanimous. Bear with me on a few chair slash member updates. First is the Neary Building Committee. So Wednesday is a big day. We have been invited by the MSBA to participate in their public meeting. It's at 10 a.m. on Wednesday. And the expectation is that they plan to make a vote to enter the Neary building into the next phase, which is feasibility. Superintendent Martineau will speak on behalf of the district. I'll be joining as well as Kathy Cook as chair of the select board, and I believe Mark is joining as well. So we have a good contingent going there. The good news is they've already sent over the legal agreements for the next phase. So, it looks like we'll be moving pretty quickly. That is the phase where we'll start to use some of the funding from last year's town meeting as well. So really big day. Looking forward to it, and probably a lot more updates coming there. Any questions on that? Next is Community Center Exploration Committee update. So that committee did tour the Finn School a couple of weeks ago as a result of the change or additional scope, I would say, we added to the potential options for elementary school consolidation. The committee has not met in public since then to actually talk about any of that, but they have had a tour, and our next step is to re-engage with DRA, which is the committee, which is the architect that this committee selected in public last year to try to figure out potential scenarios to run through, because that work stream needs to converge with the Neary work stream here over the next call it 6 to 9 months. So a lot to be done there. I'd say my initial reading on how that's working is there's a lot of interest in it. There'll be a letter going out to the community, making them aware of what's going on. And I think the committee is well represented as well in terms of some of the major stakeholders in terms of recreation, library, in council on aging, in terms of those three needs, as well as we are working with youth and family at this point as well. And then there's multiple at-large members. So it's a good group. They're working collaboratively, a lot of different opinions at this point, but we're obviously very early in the process. Any questions on that? Okay. The next is town meeting recap. I was very thankful for the lack of time I had to speak this year, so that was great. I think obviously we owe a great deal of gratitude for how the ARPA spending was allocated as well. That made things obviously a lot easier. And I'll give an update on where we're at on that later in the meeting. So everything passed that was capital in nature with no amendments. So I think we'll very quickly be shifting our focus to FY24. Obviously, the most notable in terms of dollar amount of capital was the Algonquin complex, which passed quite unanimously. It wasn't unanimous, but quite very significant majority. Northborough's town meeting is tonight, so we'll know the fate of that project tonight or tomorrow night. It's pretty deep in their agenda. I don't know how fast their town meetings move, but we should have some notice on that. If it is approved by Northborough, we'll move forward and be done by the time the fall comes, which is crazy to think. So that's where that's at. Any questions on town meeting or any feedback? I know at least a few of you were there. Okay. Last under chair's update is the pavement management program. And Steve, for your benefit, this was before your time on the committee. One of the things that came out of capital having, I don't know, the privilege is certainly not the word, but we ran the process last year for deciding which roads were going to be part of a pavement contract that ultimately you're starting to see start around town in the next couple of weeks. We had to prioritize roads, we had to do public process and vetting, but we weren't working with perfect data. So one of the recommendations that came out of that was, there were definitely a lot of people that have been recommending this way before this year, was to get some sort of pavement management system to actually assess the quality of the asphalt in all areas of town. That was a public RFQ bid process. A vendor was selected last fall, and the report is now pretty much close to final. There's a preliminary reading with Select Board member Sam Stivers. I participated, as well as the members of the DPW staff, the interim superintendent, as well as Chris Leroy, who's the operations supervisor, and Mark last week. So the good news is there's a report forthcoming. I think my takeaway is, well, our roads certainly need some work. They're not. We got an okay score on where some of the stuff is at, and I think when you look at some of the projects that we did move forward last year, they're definitely the ones near the lowest quality, which means they needed the work. So I think that's helpful, and we'll have data points as we move forward. I'm uncertain of whether there will be another paving contract specific to streets this year, but I feel very comfortable that we have the right data to work with. We will, unless the select board completely changes course, any town road money, there was the way it was worded in the warrant, would come back right through this same process next year. And I think, obviously anything can happen, through election season, et cetera, in terms of change of view, but that's how it was worded in the warrant. So I do expect that we are going to see some more paving in our future with a lot better data to work with. I would say at some point, once that gets closer, I certainly am looking for someone on the committee, like especially now that there's a new DPW superintendent that will be starting this summer, to be a liaison to that department, especially given, we don't need to decide that tonight. Obviously, I'm hoping we'll refill some of our ranks too with a few additional members once we get through this cycle. So just keep that in the back of your mind if any of you have a strong interest. I just think there's going to be a lot of DPW type projects. We talked a lot about the Corderville Road project in the last couple of years, right? And there's just other things that we're gonna have to make a decision on, whether you do large packages, small packages, maintenance versus repair versus complete reclaim. So a lot more to come there, but I feel like we're in a much greater spot. So kudos to all those that were involved on the town side on that. Any questions on that? All right. The next item is outline of process for vetting new sidewalk infrastructure and repairs and upgrades to existing infrastructure per the select board request. So it's in your packet, but I think I had also circulated the note from the select board that we received approximately a month ago. As everyone remembers, there was approximately $700,000 allocated for basically new infrastructure coming out of ARPA, was kind of the overall genesis of that. And then we have started to, and this was the first year in town meeting where we actually allocated money towards sidewalk maintenance. Right, we as a committee had a different view on the amount that ultimately made it to the warrant, but there was some other money that came through various neighborhood projects that were required to submit funding to the town as part of those overall proposals. So I think the letter was pretty self-explanatory, incredibly detailed. I do thank Kathy for at least giving me a chance to preview it before the select board voted on it, so that there was no surprises. And I did make one request to her, and I do not believe any member of the select board disputed in any way, shape, or form. Is while we're happy to run processes, we can't do costing. We can't go out and tell what needs an easement, what trees need to be cut down. Obviously, there's some hot button issues that we've seen throughout town that are going to require expertise, and they're never going to have that expertise in-house either, at least in our current structure. So there was kind of a general agreement that if we needed to access funding, we would be able to come back to the select board and discuss whether we use town engineering funds. We obviously have capital study funds, but I think some of that's going to be needed for the community center. And then there's also, you could allocate a portion of that ARPA, right, to help us along the way. So I think what I would like to do tonight is agree on what our path forward is. We're certainly not going to talk about any street, any road, but really decide what our process is going to be. And then I would like to publicly announce that process and allow basically a chance for public feedback before we finalize it and then actually go through, an actual vetting process to decide the sidewalk should go on this street versus that street. How are we going to decide on what gets repaired first? Obviously, there's weight between major connectivity points in, whether it be schools or other critical infrastructure versus cul-de-sacs, right? And everyone has different views on the weight and priority of that, especially everyone has a different view depending on what street you live on, right? And the speed of the street and the nature of your street, et cetera. So, and I also know that we have students from the charter school that have been studying in general how this process may work and probably are further along in their study and research of this than we are. So I'm going to, I know they have a short presentation they're going to want to make at some point, but I think it's important for the committee first to just have some general discussion of where we may want to go, how we may want to do this, given that this has really never been done this way before. But I do think it's really helpful, and I included this in our packet too, the 2015 sidewalk committee, right? They've been down this path before, but I think the difference is they had no funding at the end of it, right? Like I think if you look at a lot of that report, they put a lot of thought and time into it, but at the end of the day, it has sat on a shelf since 2015 because there was really no execution and implementation. So I think part of our task, and depending on what guide rails we put around the process in terms of a timeline, is going to be how you actually get this to be executed on the back end of it, right? So you decide what you're doing, how you're going to execute it using existing funds. And then I think it was very clear, at least to me, in their memo, the select board's memo, that they don't just want an idea of how to spend the existing money. They want like a complete plan, much like they've now done with the roads. So I'm going to throw out just a few factors for consideration. Then I'm going to take a breath and let everyone else react. But I did ask Beta Group, who was the entity that prepared the pavement management, what data they would have, at least on our existing infrastructure. And while I haven't received quotes of what they could do and what it would entail, I do think we already probably have some data through our existing process that may be helpful, especially for existing infrastructure, right? So I think we're gonna have to parse this into two different paths versus, I'm not sure they have as much, or I didn't get as a comfortable feeling that they would have as much around new infrastructure. So if there's a road without a sidewalk or dead ends at some point and doesn't continue, I don't get the impression that, other than the street level images that they would have, that there's going to be a ton to leverage there. But my understanding, at least talking to our DPW department, they clearly have engineering expertise that they have under contract that we could probably leverage in some way, shape, or form, depending upon which direction we go here, especially for the newer infrastructure. And then I would probably be remiss to not reinforce the fact that I think if we just put out a public call for where people want sidewalks, I think we are naturally going to get answers that largely, follow where that person lives, or follows, some, pattern that may or may not be consistent with the views of the broader public. And it's, you're not going to make everyone happy through this process, right? Like if someone's street gets ranked the bottom of the list, right? No one's ever going to agree that their street's at the bottom of the list, right? No matter how many houses are on the street, et cetera. So I think that's just something we're gonna have to weigh and take in. It clearly was something that 2015 committee had done and thought about as part of this. And then I would just add the additional layer of complexity that I think we may be dealing with is we all know that at least town meeting agreed to continue the Hopkinton water connection. And there's gonna be a significant amount of disruption to our streets already. The great news is my understanding is there's gonna be curb to curb paving that comes out of that. But if we're already digging up certain roads, we're gonna have to seriously consider if they're high on the priority list from a sidewalk perspective, how that may come into play. So not to complicate things any further, those are just kind of some of the random thoughts that are coming through my mind. But I guess I'd pause and open it up to others to see if you have any thoughts or ideas before we, start to chart a path forward here.
We'll go first. So I think there's a width that the road needs to be to even have a sidewalk. So that kind of plays into it. Has there been this is probably a silly question, but has there been a survey done of where there are currently sidewalks or sidewalks that are in need of repair or new construction that may or may not already be planning for sidewalks? Do you know if that has been done? You're on mute.
Let me go backwards on your question, Steve. I'm not aware of any new sidewalk that's currently being constructed. I will confirm that with DPW, but I think Main Street was the last one. I think you'll see some upgrades, like for example, Corderville Road right in front of Woodward and the Public Safety Building. That road's starting to be repaved now. Part of that will be repairing the sidewalk right inside of that. The only other data that I'm aware of would be you trying to use what they just used, the pavement management program. They probably have data on the existing sidewalks through that. We just didn't buy that package yet, so we'd have to figure out what that costs. And then I think this 2015 report would probably be the last other attempt that I have seen, but someone would have to go through that and say, yeah, we've actually taken care of these 5 roads since then, and here's how. That's all I'm aware of, and I had asked the DPW just to make sure. Obviously, we're going through a little bit of a transition there too, just to see what they had, and that's what they really came back with, and kind of corroborated that with Mark a little bit before this discussion.
Yeah, because like for my my neighborhood here, we have sidewalk on one side, but it's not your traditional sidewalk with a granite curb that's built up with concrete. It's it's a sloped type of asphalt, and I don't know if that's similar in other areas or really that's what the scope of what this would be. This undertaking would be, whether it be that full granite curb with concrete. A nice new sidewalk or just the asphalt pavement. Because I would think that the asphalt pavement would be much less expensive, but then again, I'm not sure of the areas in which it's been requested, or how it's previously been done.
I think it also depends on where it is, right? If you're on a main street versus for example, I live on a cul-de-sac right now. That's not even a public street yet because it hasn't been accepted by the town. There's not granite curbing, but it all depends on what the developer, like if you're on a cul-de-sac, what the developer committed to with the planning board, right? So the planning board has a part in that process as well. Other streets, right? You drive around, like you see big granite curbing, right? Like look at the new infrastructure right at the center of town. So I think it's definitely a consideration, and I don't think your assessment is inaccurate in terms of granite. It's going to cost a lot more than a rounded asphalt curb. Did you have your hand up, Joe?
Yeah, my question is sort of related to, was this what was submitted with the last master plan report that went to the town? Or was that a separate, because I think there were some listings of priorities in that as well. And I'm not sure they're any more complete than this. But
I'd have to check.
yeah,
It's a good
no
question.
worries. If you knew, great. If you didn't.
Sorry, Steve, were you all set or did you have other thoughts on that?
No, I think it was just, kind of what Joe was kind of getting to, like if there was already the priority list that had kind of gone from the 2015, if they still had that priorities, if that got taken care of, and if not, where would those list on the priority list now, if they haven't gotten it.
Okay. Any other thoughts at the moment?
Yeah. Is there any new thoughts in terms of the involvement of the DPW superintendent that we have one? Because this letter was drafted in March, right? Prior to that hiring.
The new DPW superintendent will not be starting until I believe July 24th. They have a 90-day contract. Basically they have to give 90 days to their current employer.
Okay.
So while I firmly believe that by the time he starts, he'll be involved from that point forward. And my understanding and discussions with Kathy is we need to get moving because as Joe will probably recall, there are certain timelines and when you have to actually spend, in particular, the ARPA money on. And I think, I think I've said this before to this committee. I haven't seen one uniting issue in this town more than sidewalks. In all the surveys that we've seen, right? Is everyone wants sidewalks, and I think that's held true even post-COVID. I think obviously people realized it a little more during COVID than they had previously, but it's just something that everyone should, take note of in some of the survey data that we have seen to date. So yes and no is my answer to your question, Jeff, if that helps.
Yeah, it does. And I guess my other comment would be, I do like the format of the 2015 survey. I mean, this is going to be controversial, right, in terms of which neighborhoods or which streets are selected. So there's got to be some type of methodical way to evaluate and rate. But at the same time, I do strongly believe there needs to be some type of public forum for this as well, where everyone needs a chance to at least weigh in and give everyone an opportunity to give their feedback. So that's kind of all I had to add at this point.
Okay. Anyone else have anything to add at this point?
Yeah, my only worry in this process is that we're trying to remake the wheel. I mean, this 2015 committee has already brought up a lot of the main factors and looked at them. Not that it's not worth revisiting those factors in terms of the decision being made, because I think there are some there are some considerations that they put in that obviously I don't think make sense. Whatever this last four was absolutely, it was future needs. I think that we all realize that most sidewalk based is already needed. So we don't need to dwell on some of the scores and some of the columns in some of these lists. But I think we also know that from prior reports and from this and from people talking, I mean, I look at this as a bang for the buck. We have 700,000 to put in new sidewalk. And I don't want to see us get bogged down on too many details. I think we can have a discussion of whether it's enough money to put a sidewalk, on the side of the reservoir on 85. But the reality is that, those are going to be complex. We have, as you said before, we have a closed amount of time. These projects have to get done in the next, say, about 3 years. So we need to have neighborhoods that want them intact. And projects that we can get done, not ones that we're going to wind out and have long conversations about.
And I think that's a really good point. And I think one of the things is if we find ourselves having that conversation, we can say, yes, this is a longer term need, but here are the things that we think we can just get done now that are just as high a priority, but actually able to be executed. I think will be part of that. If everyone's okay, what I'd like to do is, if the Trotter students want to make their presentation now, let them make their presentation. Then what I'll do is, once they do that, we can obviously react to anything they have to say, and then come back and outline kind of some proposed next steps based on some of the commentary you've all made. Does that make sense?
Yep.
All right, so I'm seeing 2 hands up, so I'm gonna promote them both to panelists. Oh, I get 3 now. All right, hang on. I think I got all 3. I was supposed to get 3 total. Did I get it right? Okay. Now for the really important question. I'll let you all introduce yourself in a second. Who's gonna share the presentation on the screen?
I am, I think. I just have to, do you want me to do it now? Like,
I got to give you the right access. So
okay, I think I can do it. It's like showing up for me. Oh wait, no, never mind.
now you'll be able to. You can put it up at any point in time. I just had to give you the right access. So why don't you, first of all, thank you for joining us. Why don't you 3 maybe introduce yourself just quickly for the benefit of the committee, and then the floor will be yours.
Hello, thank you for having me on. My name is Wyatt Smith, and I'm a student at Trotter Middle School.
Thank you guys also. I'm Alina Gargay and I'm also a student at Trotter Middle School.
Hi, sorry, I'm trying to get the screen to work, but I don't know what's happening. It was just working before when I was trying it. Anyway, I'm Katie. Thank you so much for giving us the time tonight. And I'm really excited for us to share this if I can get it to work, but just give me a second.
Katie, if it doesn't work, I will try to pull it up on my side, but I'll give you a few more seconds.
Yeah, I don't know if it's like my Wi-Fi or something. It just keeps on saying it's like loading. I'm not sure though.
All right, give me a second. I'll pull. You haven't made any changes to it, have you? Okay. All right, can you see it now? Katie, can you see it?
Yeah, I think I can see it.
Okay.
Um,
So you tell me when you want me to go to your next slide, but I'll drive it for you from here if that works.
Perfect. Thank you. I think Wyatt is trying to say something, but I don't know if he's on.
All right, so just to start with a little bit of background, Student Civics Action Project, student-led. It is mandatory for 8th grade requirement or 8th grade graduation, and it is required for all students to participate in. The main goal is to get students to learn and participate in either local or state government in some sort of way. That way being by developing a project where students will work together to better their community by targeting a specific issue that they determine based on their research and what the ideas they have in mind for their community. Next slide, please. So I will note, I am from a different class, but we did merge our ideas because they were very much in line. So our processes were a little bit different, but for the most part, they were the same. So our first step was to examine ourselves and our community. By examining our community, we assessed what we did have and what we didn't have. So assets were public spaces, buildings, local town government organizations, and things like that. While qualities may have been our beliefs as a town and our attitudes towards ourselves and each other. We identified our goals together as a class, and we found that some of our higher ranking things were family, safety, equality, happiness, freedom, and peace, to name a few. And from that, we evaluated what we wanted to target as our project. Next slide, please. So to identify our issue, we worked together as our classes to come up with ideas and narrow them down from there. The biggest ideas we had were outdoor spaces, accessibility to public places, and more between school interaction, just to name a few of those things. And after we conducted surveys with our fellow classmates, researched and assessed the state of these different things, we narrowed it down to sidewalks and bike lanes, because we as a group decided that, sorry, I'm a little nervous. We decided that as a group, sidewalks and bike lanes were a must because of the condition of some of them on certain parts of town, where the quality of sidewalks may be lacking, and that could endanger possibly pedestrians while out on things, whether it's walking, biking, or traveling somewhere using the town's infrastructure. I think you can go ahead 2 slides, because I kind of merged the next one with this.
That good?
Yeah, that's good. So after we decided our topic idea, we had to research and investigate what we were going to do with our idea and how we were going to go about it. So we had to research all about sidewalks and bike lanes even, as well as maintenance of sidewalks and bike lanes. So we had to assess and research the cost of them and how they would help Southborough if we were going to focus on them for a topic. You can go to the next slide. So while we were doing that, we had to understand everything and create a goal of how we were going to keep going. So specifically how we researched we were looking at online websites with other towns to see how they went about the idea and what they did with it and how much it costs and how much of a sidewalk it was and all that nitty-gritty. And then we also analyzed Google Earth to see how much or how long the sidewalks would be and just the area around to see if it was possible. And then we finally made a survey for our community to see specific locations that we should focus on and what the people wanted in particular. So you can go to the next slide. So the first thing that we asked them is if they felt like they had enough sidewalks and bike lanes in Southborough. So as you can see from the chart, most people said that they don't think that we have enough sidewalks and bike lanes, as well as they're not sure. And less people said yes. You can go to the next slide. So now for bike lanes, if you know, more people said no, less people said yes, and a little bit more people said I'm not sure. But the main point is more people said no. You can go to the next slide. But the thing that's interesting is when we asked them what they preferred or what they wanted more of, most of the people wanted more sidewalks to help the town. So I feel like the majority of people think that they would be more beneficial. So we decided to focus more on the sidewalks aspect rather than bike lanes or repairing. Okay, next slide. So finally, we asked them what roads they thought would be helpful for the town to focus on. So as you can see, a lot of people were interested in putting sidewalks around the schools, Oak Hill Road, Route 9, Parkerville, Corderville, and Main Street, to name a few. Note that this graph is only the main asks of the people in the survey. And yeah. So then we used this information to see which roads we thought would work using Google Earth and other websites. And we really focused to see which ones would be helpful because of the ADA requirements and the width of the sidewalk that it needs to be. And we also contacted other organizations and officials, which Katie's going to talk more about.
You can go to the next slide whenever you're ready. Okay, so Alina did a great job explaining the data and the survey and sort of the process that we went through. And the last part of our research was being able to contact and actually communicate with different officials and organizations. So for example, we contacted the Southborough Police Department and asked them about where they find there's been the most accidents or unsafe instances. And then we also contacted specifically Select Board Woman Mrs. Malinowski to learn about the different challenges and kind of the real process of putting in sidewalks from a government kind of point of view. I think as you guys were talking a little bit earlier, you were kind of touching on it, but the property lines, what the town owns versus what people own, private lanes, public lanes, everything like that. And what Alina said, 88 requirements. You can go next to the next slide. So what's going on? Sorry, something's happened to my computer. Okay, never mind. Our kind of last step, at least for now, is developing an action plan and figuring out where we're going to move forward and how we're going to do that. So after we've conducted all of our research, we were looking for guidance and we were just kind of seeing what would be the best to do. And we decided our best option would be to make a recommendation to the Capital Improvement Planning Committee or try and work with Southborough town officials. And we know that we're maybe a little ahead of where the process is right now, but we're just explaining kind of our end goal. And we want to follow the committee's plan and prepare a recommendation, hopefully before the end of the school year, but the timeline can change, so we're flexible. Thank you so much for giving us the time and opportunity to meet with you and talk over everything. This has been a really cool experience, and I also just want to thank Alina and Wyatt for helping with this. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask. I think the slides everyone should be able to open them. I think they should be good. So yeah.
All right. Well, I will start by saying thank you. Very impressive. I realize it's not easy coming and talking to a group of strangers. It's obviously a little more challenging, even more via Zoom. And furthermore, realizing it's being recorded and other people are watching you like you're on TV. So very impressive. Do you want our seats and do our job? I mean, it'll make our lives a lot easier. It would be my main question at this point, of how I'd like to proceed. But certainly seems like you rolled up your sleeves thus far, and definitely speaking probably on behalf of the committee, we welcome any and all involvement now. And I realize your project ends at the end of the school year, and I'm sure you've got the exact number of days that exist between now and then down pat. But also if you want to help follow through and check in every once in a while, our meetings are all recorded, and they're also open to the public as we continue. And there's always a Zoom option, even if we're meeting in person. So as you head towards Algonquin in ninth grade next year, certainly welcome any feedback that you have as this process proceeds. With that, I'll maybe pause and see if any of my committee members have questions or comments at this point for the group. I saw Joe, your hand first.
First of all, congratulations. This is a type of report that people out when they're adults get paid lots of money to produce, especially with the consumer data. I'm interested in knowing who was in your data set. Was it all students? Was it students and adults? Was it all eighth graders or students at Trotter?
I'll go first. I think Alina was also going to say something. So most of the survey was anonymous, I'm pretty sure, but we sent it out to students, and then we also sent it out, or we tried to send it out to adults in the community. And I know that both my parents responded to the email responded to the survey through my email, but I'm not sure about other ones, so it's kind of a mixed bag.
Yeah, so
How many students? Sorry, go ahead.
sorry.
Yeah, please go ahead.
So we asked at the beginning of the survey everyone's age group. So I can try and pull that up real quick. But most of the age group was 16 and under because most of it was Trotter students. And then we had a little bit of parents and other members of the community in it. So
No, that makes it interesting knowing even the students, because a lot of the streets that were included on there would have been experienced probably from when they were younger as well, which is rather interesting. Thank you. Appreciate it.
no problem.
Go ahead, Jeff.
I don't have any questions. Just want to say terrific job. Really, really impressive for all of you on this call. You all did a really good job. So really want to commend you for your hard work and efforts. So thank you.
Steve?
Yeah, I really just want to say great job. It's difficult for me still to kind of do public speaking, and it's something not a lot of people like doing, but you guys did great. You should be pretty proud of yourselves for the work you guys put in. It was a nice job.
Thank you.
So before you leave us, obviously we're going to talk about this a little more. So you're welcome to stay and listen. And then when we go on to other topics, you're welcome to stay, but I'm sure you have many other better things to be doing with your evenings. Do you like hearing our do any of you want to go on a limb, have any reaction to the conversation that we had earlier? I know it was like a little impromptu. You didn't know what we were going to discuss before you gave your presentation, but anything new that you're considering or have any thoughts around that you want to offer us before we kind of start and deliberate here?
So yeah. So about the age group, most of it was students. 96% of it was 16 and under, and then like 2% was 40 to 60, and 1.5% was 16 above. So it was mostly students that gave an input.
Okay.
But I mean, that could be seen as a benefit considering that most of the surveys that are sent out by the town are only filled out by adults. So I don't know. I thought it was kind of good for younger people to get a say or opinion in it.
We could certainly use some youth in our town government for sure.
I was personally pleased when you guys were discussing this earlier, how a lot of other people seem to be concerned about the same issue we're pushing forward today. So I think that will also help us be able to achieve our goal through being able to relate to the other people in the community.
Steve, go ahead.
So you guys have, you know, it looks like the largest amount of respondents were saying around Route 9. Route 9 and Parkerville and around the schools. Where specifically would you guys see a good opportunity to add or improve the sidewalk structures?
So for me personally, I have all my life I've lived in Southborough and I've been on the south side of town, so Nary Finn side of town, and down alongside Porterville Road. The sidewalks are in, for lack of a better word, poor condition. And I think it brings up safety concerns, especially, and I think this is backed by when we received a priority list from the Mass Dot from Mrs. Malinowski. Some of the highest on the priority list were Porterville Road improvements, especially the intersection at Richards Road.
For me personally, sorry, Katie. I live more on the northern side of town, and I see a lot of missing sidewalks around the outskirts of town, specifically the Framingham area. And like you guys were saying earlier, obviously everyone's going to want their streets to be sidewalked and everything. So obviously I would want the outskirts of Southborough to be sidewalked. But then when we surveyed all the people, a lot of them wanted more of the south side of town to be sidewalked or the schools to be sidewalked. So we decided to focus more on that aspect because if more people want it, we just thought that it would be put to better use, especially for students who would want to get outside and have that exercise, I guess.
And then lastly, I was just gonna say, I thought that it'd be more beneficial for the town in general, for everyone, if we had more sidewalks around schools or the senior citizen center. I know there is one there, but I don't know if it's in the best shape. And I just think yeah. I just feel like that'd be the most beneficial to the majority of the population, because I mean, the kids would use it every day. I know that like teachers or parents that are walking or something, that they could go outside and use them too. Sorry, it's my dog. And then also I know that when we were at Woodward, there used to be like a wake up and work out program, and I was thinking about it, and if there was like a sidewalks or like kind of like a safer area outside, that would be a great place for where kids can go and exercise and be outside in a safe environment. Because I mean, Woodward is on a busy road, so that'd be kind of it'd just be better for younger kids. So I guess anywhere where kids are kind of outside more.
So before I go to Joe, I have some good news for most of what you all just said. So I'll start with Katie because it's the freshest. Is actually this morning, if you actually drove by the Woodward School, they started to dig up the road in and around that area, which would, I think, include the sidewalk, because that's part of a paving program that the town has actually not only decided to do, but actually has a contractor under contract to execute on. So hopefully, and maybe even before the end of the school year, your request may be done. Now I forget, Alina or Wyatt, whether one of you said, which one of you said Porterville. That we have a capital plan that we manage every year. And what we do is we have to prioritize not only what roads need to be done, what sidewalks need to be done, but which fire trucks to buy, which police cars to buy, which buildings to build, which buildings to renovate. And we have to, everything takes priority, right? So you think just coming up with a list of roads is tough. Now try to deal with competing interests, because obviously everyone has their own needs every year. Porterville Road is one of the top projects on the docket for next year. All the way from basically where the public safety building is. So basically think about that north side of town, all the way down to the MBTA station. So think about how long of a stretch that is, includes some of these sidewalks you're talking about. That's one of the priorities for next year. It'll be very complicated because of easements in trees along there about what infrastructure can fit. And obviously, we're going to have to start to figure out a process to work with the neighbors as well, because they're going to have certain thoughts along the way. So figured I'd point that out because that's more of something to come. But you'll probably see a lot about it as you learn about the town. Joe, I'm going to go to you first.
Yeah, I had another question. This come up on this committee before and we talked about it on ARPA. And one of the big problems we have with sidewalk connectivity is the fact that we don't control access to some of the roads that cross over the reservoirs and over the highways. And we have trouble because we have to deal with state agencies and different state agencies in doing that. Now, I was wondering if in the conversations that you all had as students, whether you had ever approached the idea of having to deal with multiple different entities to build the sidewalks and how you might go about planning for doing that.
So yeah, so Mrs. Malinowski kind of explained that to us and all the requirements with the ADA and the property lines and what the state owns versus what the town owns. So we basically decided, since we have a lot of streets, about like 8 or 9 streets that a lot of people want, and it's a pretty close number. So we decided to look on Google Earth and see which would be the most suitable for us in our class regarding the state and what they own and the ADA requirements. So we're currently working on an ask. So if you guys would want to look at it in a future meeting, we would be willing to share it.
Awesome. Joe, do you have anything else? Because I know Katie and Alina had their hands up before you
Yep,
asked them
no.
that question.
No, let them fire away, please.
All right. Katie, why don't you go first?
So I just, this is quick, but I heard you were talking about how trees are an issue with roads and whether it's like expanding them or repaving them or adding sidewalks or all of it. And I just wanted to say that I think that if the town wanted to work on or work with schools and kind of create like a green club, that could be something that you might be interested in, because one of the biggest issues that I heard of, at least, was that people don't want to cut down the trees because they're pretty, they have foliage, they're also good for the environment and everything of that kind of sort. I know that Trotter used to have a green club. I don't think it's at the school anymore, but I know that there's like a bunch of different clubs at Algonquin that'd be interested in kind of helping out. So if there was ever a worry or a complaint about there not being enough trees or the trees not being handled correctly, I'm sure that students would volunteer and kind of help plant them, help tend trees, move trees, relocate them. And I don't know if this is exactly what you were touching on, but I just know that some people don't want all the trees gone. And I think that there's like a lot of options to help maintain Southborough's greenery.
Yeah, no, I think it touches on that. This committee won't deal with most of that, other than identifying the issue. We don't really have the ability to solve some of those issues. We actually have a tree warden in town. And we also have our planning board that has, and the select board, that both are very involved as part of that, some of those processes too. Depending upon which road it is, it can be 2 different sets of rules. I don't know if you went over that, but that's another factor that goes into all of these decisions as well. So, Alina, did you have anything else to add on to that? I know your hand went up and down.
Yeah, so I said what I was going to say when I was answering the question before.
Okay, great. Joe, do you have anything, any final comments on this?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I want to ask the 3 of them, as Katie brought it up. I mean, if you had to choose between trees or sidewalks, in a general sense, I mean, do students value the trees along the side of the roads more than sidewalks, or do they really value the sidewalks as a safety issue or a transport issue in this over the value of the trees?
I mean, to me personally, as pretty as trees can be, I believe pedestrian safety, the safety of someone's life comes before any sort of pretty scenery.
I think I kind of have to disagree with Wyatt. I definitely agree that safety is something that it should be valued highly. Although I understand that trees are a vital part of the environment, and I mean, it was there, it was here before us, so I feel like a part of it should be untouched. I think that the key to it would be a balance, because obviously, like what I was saying earlier, is I think it'd be really beneficial for there to be more sidewalks, so that like specifically kids could go outside and safely exercise and, you know, draw in chalk and everything like that. But I think trees are also a vital part of the earth, so I feel like there has to be a little bit of a balance.
Yeah, kind of adding on to what Katie said. So that could also help us narrow down our list of like 8 or 9 roads to see which roads the trees don't come in contact with that much, along with the other requirements that are kind of challenges. So I think that also helps narrow down our list, which, believe it or not, can be a good thing.
Anything we can do to narrow down a list is usually seen as a win on this committee. So here's what I'm going to do, unless you three have anything else that you want to add into this part of the conversation. I'm going to move you back to attendees. You're welcome to listen to us, but I'll give you a break from the screen, etc. And then we're going to finish the sidewalk topic, then we're going to move on, but we obviously have to decide where we're going to go with this now. Does that work for all of you? All right. Thank you again for coming. You obviously know where to find us if you want to weigh in as you progress over your final couple of months of school and get towards your final project. And we'll be certain to make sure you're getting updates from us as well. And obviously all of our meetings are public and open, so you're welcome to join us.
Great job.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Anytime. Thank you.
Good luck, guys.
All right. So what I think we should do now is I'm going to make a few proposals of what we need to do. So the first is, I think we need to make people aware of what we're actually doing. I take no assumptions that people have followed when the select board voted on this letter. You know, there's a certain number of people that watch select board meetings and that's it. So I think we need to basically advertise what we're going to be doing so that the public can weigh in early on whether we've taken a wrong turn on this process. So I think whatever we decide on here, unless someone disagrees, I think we just need to make it widely known how we're going to go about it and allow people to submit feedback before we get too far down the path and people, you know, want us to pull a 180, because we need to move quickly on this. We don't need to rush it, but there needs to be some sense of urgency and process on that. So I don't know, Joe and Steve, Jeff and Steve, I see you both put your hands up, so pause there.
Steve, you go first.
I think a good start for it, and I'm not, telling everybody else how to run it, but would be to kind of identify, they had some great figures there of, the roads that we needed to do. Perhaps doing like a takeoff, this is going to be 400 linear feet of new potential sidewalk. This 400 feet is going to be X amount. This will fit, and then categorize that and say, the cost per linear foot, here's what we feel are the highest priorities. And then kind of, and say, you could even say like, we've identified these as our highest priorities. These roads can fit within this budget of doing it based on this square, the linear foot of this sidewalk. Have that potential plan of attack. Not everyone's going to agree with it. I well aware of that, but it will be able to at least show that our due diligence has been started to say, here's the cost per linear foot, where this road is X linear feet, this is going to cost this much money. The next road, Woodbury Road, is this many linear feet of added new scope. Here's the the linear foot cost. This road and this road, for the budget that we've been given, can be completed, and then perhaps vote that way. That would just be one way that I would kind of propose it.
Okay, Jeff?
I think first we need to break it up into two different buckets, as you suggested, Jason, new versus existing. For existing, I think the primary focus needs to be probably on safety, right? Those sidewalks that need to be replaced. And that kind of goes along with our capital policy, one of which is, poses safety concerns or other criteria that would help us risk rate those. And then for anything that's new, it'd be helpful if we could get an understanding of where there would be some potential future impact of construction or, impact from Hopkinton's water line or other things that are potentially going on in the next couple of years. And then from there, I think we should probably solicit some feedback from the community on those roads without sidewalks. And again, I think we need some type of metrics to rate against to be able to come up with a fair and equitable methodology.
You have something else, Steve?
Sorry, no.
Okay. Go ahead, Joe. You're on mute.
Sorry. As I said before, I mean, I really think there are a couple of categories on the evaluation that you sent around to us. For instance, traffic usage, pedestrian impact, safety. The most that would give us the most link for our buck between existing sidewalks, as well as town points of importance. I think those are sort of the main categories that I have in mind as to where to be. And obviously, other members of the board have already brought up considerations that will be, and going into that final decision. But I think those are more on the pare down side as opposed to the direct choices. I'd like to see us put together a list of choices, sort of in the way that Steve said. And I think what Jeffrey was saying is then having a bit of more of a pare down process. So we have our build-up factors and our considerations, and then we have our elimination factors. In terms of the way that we can sort of efficiently go with the process, sort of in between those two buckets would be a great place to have all that feedback about where the public, sits, as opposed maybe give them, as ARPA tried to do in some of the things that it did with its choices, give people a list and have them come in understanding that we have a list. And if they want to go off the list, that's fine, but otherwise to sort of endorse whatever they feel the best choices for the town are, where we feel they can get the best bang for their buck. Because I think then we can try and focus sort of attention and opinions onto, what's most productive use of the money. And as Steve said, some of them will bow themselves out because they don't fit the financial considerations. So, I think as a process, I think that could be an effective one. I don't know how everybody else feels about that, but I think that's a good place to start.
I want to read one paragraph from the select board memo, just to make sure we're all on the same page. And then we might try to find a way to tie this together. We ask that you not limit your recommendation to a set of new sidewalks to what could be funded with the ARPA funds. Instead, we would like an overall recommendation from you as to where new sidewalks should be built. We do want you to prioritize the new sidewalks, as you recently did with the roads currently scheduled for work. We hope that we can find other sources to pay for the proposed sidewalks that exceed the ARPA funds. So the one thing I personally at least want to be careful of now, let's not worry about cost for a minute. let's figure out where we think the greatest need is. And then cost could certainly be, right? It could cost you $1 million to do 100 linear feet in Steve's example, but it could cost you $1 million to do 1,000 linear feet on another street because of the factors, right? And maybe that street has higher priority. So I just want to, my only caution on cost at this point is we know we'll get there, but if I don't think we understand where the priorities are yet, we can use cost as potentially a reason to disqualify something or to lower prioritize it, versus if you make general assumptions up front, right, that it could be good, it could be bad, right? Like we could over or underestimate. Just food for consideration. Jeff, I think you were touching on this a little bit, is I think we need to separate the two. So maybe let me help try to dispose of one topic, and we can, on the repair, so basically existing infrastructure, what I would propose we do is get a current inventory of what exists for sidewalks. How many linear feet, what's the quality it's in, and we get the proposal from Beta Group, who did the actual roads, of what it's going to be to understand that. I can almost guarantee that if they produce the same reports they produced for the roads, that if they could do that for the sidewalks, our job would be 90-ish% done in terms of the inventory. And then it comes down to prioritization and costing based on that. So I don't feel any need to reinvent the wheel, especially given they already have the data. They just got to do it however they do it, which is well beyond my capabilities. Does anyone have any objections to that piece?
Did anybody else just freeze up, or was it just me? No, it's just me? Okay. I lost you for about 30 seconds in there somewhere, but don't worry, keep going.
Punchline, Joe, get a quote that we can vote on to use the Beta Group, who did the pavement management, to do the same thing for sidewalks for what we already have.
Okay, got it.
That I think, you guys tell me if I think that's the easier part. It won't be easy prioritizing any of this, let's be honest, but that's the easier part. I think we already have the data. We could probably make some recommendations in that quicker. On the new, I think there's a few things, right? We have this 15 report. We shouldn't be bound by it, but we got to understand what's been done since then. And part of it is like, I just think making sure we've got all the documentations from DPW along the way, that like there wasn't like interim reports that have occurred. So I'll take that to do, just to make sure we've dusted all that off, because I do know there was discussion of Complete Streets program and how that all works when we talked about Cordova Road in particular. So just something to keep in the back of your mind. But on the new, I think it's going to be involved, right? Like there's no two ways of putting it. I would like to understand what the town service providers could give us based on their knowledge, right? Like what proposal could they come back to us with, and what would we get as a deliverable, and have us react to that, right? And say, all right, you're going to get this, it's going to cost you that, fine, we can afford it, but is it really what we need to then make informed decisions from there? Otherwise, I think it's a little bit of a lot of subjectivity too early on, right? The subjectivity is going to come in on the back end. Well, there's no doubt about that, right? In terms of Jeff may view something as higher priority than I do for a variety of reasons. But I'd like to have some data around this is a non-starter, even though it'd be great to have a sidewalk over Route 9 as an example, right? It's just a non-starter due to cost or this or that. That's the best way I can think of advancing this, to get some professional assistance that we can then use a lot of the things that we heard from the students, but also us in terms of surveying and actually giving people something to react to, as opposed to listening to like the loudest voice in the room of you get 200 people from the same street that flood a survey. But another street didn't even realize it was going on because they weren't paying attention. That's what I'm trying to figure out a path forward. So I spoke enough. Joe, why don't you go first, then Steve?
Yeah, I just want to sort of push back on that, on the passage from that letter. Because I think what it does is it leads down a rabbit hole. Because if you ask me right now, what I think the biggest problem for our community is what we talked about in ARPA, which was, we've thought about trying to fund a study for a bike path that would lead from Fayetteville on the tracks over to the center of town. Because what we saw was that we're town divided we don't have good bike or pedestrian conduits because of the state, of the state lands in the middle of our town. And going over and trying to enlarge those roads, or even to put in sidewalks along those roads across the reservoirs is, let's face it, it's a rabbit hole. But if you ask me the way that letter sort of does and leads me to, I would be like, oh, we're redoing 85. We should get a sidewalk across that reservoir now. And we should get, sidewalk going from the transfer station all the way across to the other side where the trails and the golf course are. So I just want to push back on that letter, the sort of language in that letter to say, I don't want us to be thrown down the rabbit hole because of that language. Thanks.
It's a fair comment. Go ahead, Steve.
I might be kind of jumping ahead a little bit, but like the woodland area and the like Breakneck Hill, currently I don't think there is a sidewalk there. So with that being kind of existing infrastructure there, I think it would get into the easements, correct? Of, one side of it's the conservation land, and then everything is kind of, because I know that in Hopkinton up in the town center, they did the bike lane, and there was petitions all down the road, all down Main Street about, trying to block the easements. So I'm just thinking probably a lot further ahead right now, but do you think that we'll have those same kind of easements that will be required in order to put a sidewalk in those areas? And would that then, I would think that would probably discount that area at that point, but
I mean, I'm certainly not ready to talk about any streets tonight, but I would imagine that's what we need. That's, I think, the question we need help with, right? It's, we can all go and look at something, but unless you have the site survey data, right? Like, you could go visually look at it and say, yeah, no way, you'd have to take this amount. But how do you know that whose is what parcel of land? I don't think you can do that without site surveys and the right expertise. And I think we'll probably be surprised. Like, in some spots, you may actually be able to fit a sidewalk where you never thought, and vice versa. You may think that this road is nice and wide, but there's some issue or something else going on in that road from a infrastructure perspective. Like telephone poles is a great example, right? Like, think about the telephone poles in the sidewalk on Main Street still, right? And how they had to move all that. I don't know if you were in town when that was all being moved and transitioned from those poles. So I think the short answer is it's a great question. I just don't know that we know it without professional expertise.
that was all. Thank you.
Okay. So Joe, so we can close the loop on this, on your pushback of that paragraph I read, which there's an exact reason, that's the exact reason why I read it. Do you want to just let the process play out a little bit and call kind of an audible if we find ourselves going down a rabbit hole and regroup with the select board then? Or you think there's a regroup we want to have now before we do anything else and I think it's particular on the new sidewalks. I don't think it has anything to do with the existing structure.
Yeah, no, the existing sidewalks, I mean, we've talked at sort of every time the budget item comes up every year. So I'm totally there for you. I'm willing to explore and go down, at least flesh out a rabbit hole, but I just don't want us to get caught in one. And that's, cause like I said, I'd love what I'd love, but I got 3 years and I don't have, I don't, and we won't, not 3 years. We have what, maybe 1 year, a year and a half to be in the ground. So, or be ready to go in the ground.
We're going to have to make some recommendations this calendar year on where to go with at least the existing funding if there's a clear path.
So,
Like that's just my, right? So that way you're paving this, you're doing this construction next spring. That would be my
yeah.
thought.
And ARPA, we talked at length about how we wanted new sidewalks. So, I'm glad we're here talking about it. And set us out, Jason. We'll do it.
So you broke up at the end there.
Oh, I was just saying, hey, lead on, fearless leader. Let's go.
Okay. All right. So I'm gonna go. So what I will do for our next meeting is kind of get quotes for each and make sure it's going to accomplish what everyone here wants to accomplish to be able to start to make informed decisions. But at least have the data at our fingertips. Sorry, someone just texted me. Apparently the Algonquin vote just happened. So I'm waiting for bated breath on whether it actually happened.
So they texted you, but they didn't tell you.
No, so I'm not willing to go down that rabbit hole. All right. Moving on. So all right, we got our path forward on this. I will put something out publicly that we're starting to look at this. If you have a strong view of where we go with it, submit your feedback in writing. Okay. So next agenda item is going to be discussion of 21 Highland Street report made to Shopsy. Scheduling that was obviously impossible. So I just told Shopsy to have their meeting. Tom Biscoval, which was on the subcommittee with Joe that dealt with that, did a tremendous job. Kudos to you, Joe, too, and the rest of the group there. There was a ton of accolades that were around that whole committee. I guess my question is, Jeff and Steve, have you listened or heard that meeting yet or no?
Yes.
I have not.
Okay. So I would like to take a formal vote on if there's any recommendations coming specifically from Capital in reaction to the report. But Steve, it'd be good for you. It was less than an hour, if I remember, and it was like a solo. I can find the link if you need it. Just to read the report, and if anyone needs a copy of the report or can't find it, et cetera, let me know. And just listen to that dialogue just to see where we want to go. If we have any recommendations, otherwise it's going to be really up to probably the new 5-member select board to decide what to do with that. I will say from a capital perspective, the only thing I weighed in on is we just can't let this sit there another year, right? That building needs some attention, so they just need to decide how they're going to do it. Otherwise, it's on the capital plan from John Parent as an example. So, any questions on that? So, Steve, let me know if you need the links to any of that.
Yeah,
the timing of when you came on.
Yeah, if you could send, that'd be great. I'll take a look at it. If you
Okay.
could send that to me. Thank you.
Great.
Jason, where's the report? I couldn't find it.
I will track it down.
Okay, thank you.
Because I couldn't remember if that was part of that or not, but I know there is a report, so I'll find it.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Next item. Capital.
Jason,
Yeah.
I'll send Jeff the report.
Can you send it to
Thank-
Steve? Steve, send it to Steve and Tony too, because remember Tony
Yep.
sent it tonight.
Yes, I'll send it to everybody.
Great.
Thank you, Joe.
All right. Capital project status and procedures moving forward. So right after town meeting, I sat down with Brian and Carla to now that we're obviously a standing bylaw and have been standing bylaw committee and have been now for 6 to 9 months, right, since the AG signed off on it. Really make sure that we understand what's going to happen at year end with all the capital projects, right? Remember, a capital project can roll from year to year. That's why you put it through as an article as opposed to the operating budget, right? Just all goes back to free cash. Really strong kudos to Carla and Brian in particular for staying on top of the department heads to make sure that they're moving these projects forward. We all know, right, COVID got in the way of a lot of things, right? I think the fire tender is the best example, right? That's still nowhere close to being manufactured. It has nothing to do with the chiefs in action or anything like that. It's just that's the supply chain at this point, but just really making sure that the department heads are pushing forward on all of these items that have been approved to obviously keep any sort of, whether it be inflationary delay timeline, in place. So in particular, Mark was also in that meeting too. Mark was going to go back and push back on some things that he thought was maybe should be moving a little quicker. And my understanding, because some of the department heads have reached out since then, or I've seen them in passing. I think everyone appreciated that little nudge. So I think all is good there. So what we're going to do is, any of you that have followed the operating budget in the past, know that there's a series of like department transfers or reserve fund transfers that is really combination select board and or advisory, depending on the category. And what we're going to do is basically have a listing in and around the end of the fiscal year of any project that's carrying forward to next year that's greater than a year old. In capital, we'll take what I'll call an omnibus vote, or we'll pick and choose which ones like we want to pick off and push on a little bit more, but really trying to tighten up how long things are sitting on the books for. So for example, there's some 2017, 2018 projects that was 5 years ago. These things were funded, still sitting on the books, right? Just really, if the initial scope of the project couldn't be completed in a few years, like we put up a public safety building in 18 months, right? Like a building is going to always take longer than one-off projects. We've got things that were approved before that building was approved. So just as an example. So, but one of the things we as capital are going to have to do, and I'd like to round out our membership before we do it, is we're going to assign a liaison to each department, right? Very similar, like Joe was tracking a few things, I was tracking a few things, but we actually formally by our bylaw have to have a liaison now to these projects. I think the easiest way is to do it by department. We all know that there are some departments that are really capital intensive and some that have one project every 5 years. So we will be doing that in a forthcoming meeting, but I wanted to warn everyone that in and around June, July, we'll have something to kind of report on. And what I'll try to do is give everyone a heads up about a month before of what's trending towards that list, so that Joe, you can say, there's no way I'm going to improve rolling that forward, right? We give the department head heads up, right? Like, can we say like, it's time to either close this project out or move it on, or get it done, sort of thing. So that's just a foreshadowing of something that's to come. The next is item 7, which is potential vote on letter to the select board advisory regarding old capital projects. This is mainly related to the CPC projects we've talked about for many years. Now, I think like Ryan in particular has pushed this topic. Unfortunately, CPC is going through a bit of a transition in terms of membership as well. So, but they've got projects as old as 2010 still out there. And while they certainly have their own authority under state statute, I think our goal is just to educate on best capital policies. I held off on actually drafting a letter because I wanted to be respectful of the fact that they have changing kind of membership, et cetera. But any sort of reach out, so what I was planning to do, unless this committee disagrees, is just reach out gently again and just say, we've been monitoring this. We really need to find a way to close some of these out. It doesn't jive with the capital policy. Is there anything we can do to help you? Because remember, CPC receives requests and brings it forward to town meeting, and then they have oversight on some of those projects. But there's always another party involved that's had petitioned for the fund. So it's not as simple. Like, there's a reason why some of them are open. I just want to, it's not that they're not executing, it's really the parties that had sought the funding, So I'm going to just, unless someone disagrees, reach out in more of a offering setting of how can we help you to streamline this? Because I think it's also going to inform, right, the debate we heard on town meeting floor of whether we raise the CPA surcharge moving forward. But if you can't close out these projects, it's going to be really hard to make an argument to up the surcharge, right, and kind of leave some of the stuff for, right? So again, I don't have a view on that particular matter at this point, but I just think if we're pushing people on other matters, we should at least make people aware, which then I was going to refer it to, if we hit resistance, refer it to the select board, who's the appointing authority, and to advisory that really has oversight of all, matters like that, and has some process that they could hopefully follow. But I'm not there yet, at least personally. So are there any questions on that? It's again, the topic Joe and Jeff have heard probably too many times. Steve, it's probably new for you. But it's still on the radar. Okay. With that, is there any public comment? All right. So any other business anyone wants to conduct tonight? All right. So in terms of meeting schedule, what I'll do is see if we can't get those quotes pretty quickly and come back. I'd like to just get the sidewalk thing moving. Right, while we have a little bit of a lull before we start talking about FY25 capital requests, which, Steve, for your benefit, usually happens mid to late summer is when the department heads submit their requests and all of that. And obviously, we're going to be looking at some major capital projects in the next year, right? We're talking buildings now. We're not talking vehicles anymore.
Cool.
All right. I'll move that we adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any further conversation? All right. Roll call vote. Park,
Aye.
Holland,
Aye.
Palmer,
Aye.
and Malinowski is aye. Have a good evening, everyone.
Thanks. You too.
Thanks, everyone.
You guys.